بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين اللهم لا سهل إلا ما جعلته سهلا وأنت تجعل الحزن إذا شئت سهلا اللهم اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So inshallah we're going to get started. And for anyone who's new, pretty much this session is just going over the 40 Hadith of Imam Nawawi. And pretty much we're going through week by week one Hadith. And then I prepare pretty much a summary of the commentary that I'm going through, which is by someone named Imam Ibn Rajab al-Hanbali rahimahullah. So he gives a quick commentary on each hadith. I read the commentary and then summarize it, and then sometimes we'll add some of my own commentary as well. So today's hadith, we'll go over two actually. I'll go shorter, but because we need to speed up to finish the rest of them by the end of this semester, we'll go over number 8 and number 9. So hadith number 8. عن ابن عمر رضي الله عنهما أن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم قال أمرت أن أقاتل الناس حتى يشهدوا أن لا إله إلا الله وأن محمد رسول الله ويقيموا الصلاة ويؤتوا الزكاة فإذا فعلوا ذلك عصموا مني دماءهم وأموالهم إلا بحق الإسلام وحسابهم على الله تعالى. رواه البخاري ومسلم. On the authority of Abdullah ibn Umar radiallahu anhuma, that Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam said, I have been ordered to fight against the people until they testify that there is none worthy of worship except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam is the messenger of Allah, and until they establish the salah and pay the zakah, and if they do that, then they will have gained protection from me for their lives and property, unless they commit acts that are punishable in Islam, and their reckoning will be with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So when explaining the hadith, the most or central point about this hadith is that if people testify with, first of all, the shahadatain, that la ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah, that there is no God but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that Muhammad is the final prophet of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if they establish the salah and then thirdly pay the zakah, then they're safe. They're safe from the fighting that the Prophet ﷺ was commanded to fight them. And now we'll go over one small story that is, I'm sure most of us have probably heard of before, or at least have heard when discussing with this hadith, right? Which is عن أبي هريرة رضي الله عنه قال لما توفي رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم واستخلف أبو بكر الصديق بعده وكفر من كفر من العرب قال عمر لأبي بكر كيف تقاتل الناس وقد قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم أمرت أن أقاتل الناس حتى يقولوا لا إله إلا الله فمن قال لا إله إلا الله فقد عصم مني ماله ونفسه إلا بحقه وحسابه على الله عز وجل. So this story is narrated by Abu Hurairah that when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam passed away, there was groups of, and after Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anhu became the Khalifa, there was groups from the Arab who apostated. And in this narration, it doesn't explain what the reason for directly. Well, we'll see the rest of the story, we'll explain it. But it just says that these people apostated. So some of the Arabs apostated and some of them didn't. And when Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu wanted to fight one of this group that apostated, Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anhu was opposed to this, and he went up to him and told him, how can you fight people who are quote unquote Muslim? Because I heard Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam say that I've been commanded, so notice this, the words very similar to this hadith we just went over. I've been commanded to fight the people until they say La ilaha illallah, and whoever says La ilaha illallah, then he's safe, his body, himself, and his money is all safe from me except with its right, in that their account is to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So notice the slight difference in the narrations. In this narration we went over, it mentions وَيُقِيمُوا الصَّلَاةَ وَيُؤْتُوا الزَّكَاةَ, that if they establish the prayer and then give the zakah, versus the narration that Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anhu quoted to Abu Bakr does not include that. So we see that Abu Bakr says, فقال أبو بكر والله لأقاتلن من فرق بين الصلاة والزكاة فإن الزكاة حق المال والله لو منعوني عقالا كانوا يؤدونه إلى رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم لقاتلتهم على منعه فقال عمر فوالله ما هو إلا أن رأيت أن الله قد شرح صدر أبي بكر القتال فعرفت أنه الحق. that Abu Bakr, he made a statement and he said, by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I will fight whoever makes a difference between salah and zakah. And then continuing on, he says that zakah is the right upon the money, and that if they don't give Abu Bakr exactly what they used to give Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he will fight them over that. So the point of the story is that these Arabs who apostated, it's not mentioned directly here, but the reason why they apostated is because they said we don't want to pay the zakat. That the zakat, their understanding, which is a false understanding, that zakat ended with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That because Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has passed away, now we're not going to give any zakat anymore. Abu Bakr radiallahu an, and this was the correct opinion, he considered this to be mukhrij min millah. It removes you from the religion. Versus Umar al-Khattab radiallahu an said that this doesn't completely remove them from religion. How can you fight them when this hadith that Umar al-Khattab is quoting, which is again a narration that doesn't include the salah and the zakah directly, he mentions this narration and says this hadith clearly says that we're not supposed to fight these people. He say La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah. So the point we see from this is that there are certain things that if rejected, they remove the person from the fold of Islam. And that's why in this narration mentioned in the compilation of Imam Nawawi is the one that includes yuqimuna as-salah wa yu'tu az-zakah. And of course there's a lot more. There's like 10 or 12 around the same wording. So these three things are very, very important. That the person who says La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah, the person who establishes the salah, and the person who pays the zakah, this person's blood is safe. Now, the focus here, if we take a step back, is why are we talking about this idea of jihad in the first place? Why is Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam saying umirtu an uqatil an-nas? Look at the generality of the wording, that I've been commanded to fight the people. So here it's not saying that I'm commanded to fight, a portion of the people. It's saying all people unless they do 1, 2, 3. The reason why is because this idea of jihad, or this idea of qital, or this idea of fighting, is the method that Islam prescribes for spreading the da'wah of Islam. And this is an important key point we have to understand. When we have, for example, like on campuses or in masajid, etc., they have like da'wah efforts, right? Like for example, you have chaplains who go to prisons and they'll speak to the prisoners and give them da'wah to Islam. Or over here we'll have a da'wah booth, right? And call non-Muslims to Islam. This is one way on an individual or even on a group level for someone to call people to Islam. But when it comes to spreading Islam on a state level, on a societal level, that method prescribed is jihad. And that's why we see that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, before he would go directly towards the fighting, he would give them the 3 conditions, right? He would tell them that if you become a Muslim, aslim taslam, that if you become Muslim, you'll have peace, and you'll be given your good deeds ×2, right? But if they don't accept Islam, then at least accept the rule of Islam and pay the jizya. And then if they don't accept that either, then you go to the third option, or the last option, which is fighting. And this is an important concept again to understand why, because some of us might look at this and be like, why does Islam prescribe us to fight people just because they don't accept, the ruling of Islam over them? And the answer to this question is very simple, that Islam is the true religion. Simple as that. And this true religion from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that we know is objectively true. Objectively, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has prescribed that the ones who don't accept the ruling of Islam, they must be fought. So other than the fact that this is simply the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, also on top of that we have to understand, again from a societal perspective, and this is what we see in our history, that when the physical barriers in front of people from understanding Islam, when that's removed, people will start to see the light of Islam, and then they truly have a choice whether to accept Islam or not. And for example, we all know the ayah, right? لا إكراه في الدين قد تبين الرشد من الغي. That there is no compulsion in religion, and what's righteous is very clear from that which is not righteous. So we don't have this idea of compulsion in religion, in forcing someone into Islam. But we do have this idea that Allah prescribed that umirtu an uqatil an-nas, that I'm commanded to fight the people. And the reason why, like if we look into our history, when Islam becomes the ruling system, when Islam takes over a country and its rules are applied into that country, it gives rights to the people to worship what they want to worship, of course within the limits of the state. But also, they see the justice of Islam. And when they see the justice of Islam, that's when they truly have a choice whether to accept Islam or not. Because if you think about it, if we juxtapose it to our current day now, where you don't have a good example of a Muslim state, and actually you have the opposite. You have bad examples of a Muslim state. Like for example, you take like the most extreme example of like ISIS, for example. If you take that, these kind of states push people away from Islam. And that's why I'm sure most of us here, like when you're talking to people, one of the first things they want to bring up or they ask questions about is, do you guys oppress women? Do you guys force them to wear hijab? What do you think about ISIS? What do you think about terrorism? What do you think about 9/11? Do you guys kill civilians in this religion, etc.? Which we'll get to. But Prophet gives advice to the Sarai he used to send out, these battalions he used to send out. He would tell them very specific commandments that you can't do this, you can't do that. But these are some of the first questions they ask. Why? Because this is the example of Islam they see in front of them. So this is Islam on a quote-unquote societal level. And that's why they have such a fear of Islam and such a hatred towards Islam, is because they see what quote-unquote Islam looks like when it's implemented. Therefore, they take that and they make an analogy that this is what people believe in. When in reality, this is a bad example, which shows a bad example for us, and the opposite in our history, when you had a very righteous example, when you had a Khalifa who would send an entire army that would end up where the woman was screaming out Al-Mu'tasim and would still be leaving from Al-Mu'tasim himself, and this person wasn't even a Muslim. Think about that. Wasn't even a Muslim. So the rights that Islam would give, people would see that and they would say, okay, there must be some truth to this religion. Now, one of the conditions that is mentioned in the commentary is that if the army hears the adhan or sees a masjid, it should not attack. And this is because there is sha'a'ir of Islam, and that is what is like a hallmark of Darul Islam. So it says, وثبت أن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم كان إذا غزا قوما لم يغزو عليهم حتى يصبح فإن سمع أذانا وإلا أغاز عليهم مع احتمال أن يكونوا قد دخلوا في الإسلام. So it's been authentically reported that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, if he attacked or if he went on a battle against a people, he does not physically attack them, until he makes sure that there is no adhan that goes up. And the reason why is because there might be the possibility that they've accepted Islam. And now the reason why adhan specifically is mentioned, or this idea of masajid, is because these are rituals of Islam. And specifically, these are things that are raised in Darul Islam to show that this land is considered quote-unquote Darul Islam. Now, without getting too much into detail, Darul Islam is like a fiqhi term, which pretty much divides lands into Darul Islam, Darul Kufr, meaning one is like the abode of Islam, another one is the abode of Kufr. An abode of Islam is one that is ruled by the rules of Islam and protected by security of Islam, versus Darul Kufr is one that doesn't have one of these two conditions. So if this land is Darul Islam, or there's a possibility that these are Muslims inside, then Prophet would not attack. Now again, another key point from his hadith is that وَحُكْمُ مَنْ تَرَكَ شَيْئًا مِنْ أَرْكَانِ الْإِسْلَامِ أَنْ يُقَاتَلُوا عَلَيْهَا كَمَا يُقَاتِلُونَ عَلَى تَرْكِ الصَّلَاةِ وَالزَّكَاةِ. That the ruling upon the person who leaves any of the pillars of Islam, then this person must be fought over because of him leaving this rukun of Islam. So again, like we discussed before, I think in hadith number 2 or 3, certain things in the deen are qat'i. We said before, qat'i means definitive. So if it's definitive, then that means that's something that we have to believe in and act upon. If it's something that we reject, if we reject that thing, knowing it's definitive in the religion, then that's something that would nullify our iman. Now, the last couple points I'll mention about this, and then we'll move on to the next hadith, a very short commentary, and then we'll have question and answer, inshallah. It's important to actually believe in the idea that this deen, or this way of life, has come to prevail over all of mankind. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, هو الذي أرسل رسوله بالهدى ودين الحق ليظهره على الدين كله. That He is the one who sent His messenger with the deen of truth, with the guidance and the deen of truth, ليظهره على الدين كله. And this key phrase right here, ليظهره, means to make apparent or to make it prevail over all other ways of life. So when we believe in this idea that, and notice, look at the ayah, هو الذي أرسل رسوله بالهدى ودين الحق ليظهره. So first, the messenger is sent with the guidance, and this guidance is the true deen, it's the truth. And after the truth, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions that to be apparent or to make prevail over all other ways of life. So if we believe that this messenger, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, came with the huda, came with guidance, the true guidance, and he came with deenul haq, the true deen, then we should also want it to prevail over all other ways of life. So believing in this point is a very important, a takeaway from this hadith. Now, the last thing I'll mention is, more specifically for the brothers, but there's a hadith that we often, or we don't hear very often, and sometimes even if we do hear it, we think how does this apply to me? Well, Rasulullah mentioned another hadith where he says, "Man mata walam yaghzu walam yuhaddith nafsahu bil ghazu mata ala shu'batin min an-nifaq." Look how heavy this hadith is. That Rasulullah says, "Man mata walam yaghzu," whoever dies and he has not fought in a battle, walam yuhaddith nafsahu bil ghazu, and he didn't speak to himself about going out for a battle, meaning he didn't make clear the intention that if I get the opportunity to go for jihad or to go for a ghazwa, I will go. مَاتَ عَلَى شُعْبَةٍ مِنَ النِّفَاقِ, then he's died on a branch of hypocrisy. So this is the level of sin for someone who, number one, has not fought in a battle, and then on top of that, let's say for example he has an actual excuse, like he's disabled, etc., or he was sick, he couldn't go out for battle. وَلَمْ يُحَدِّثْ نَفْسَهُ بِالْغَزْوِ, but he never actually made sincere intention. He never said to himself, if I did have the opportunity, I would for sure go out for a ghazwa. Or I looked to the opportunity to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that inshallah one day I can go for a ghazwa. مَاتَ عَلَى شُعْبَةٍ مِنَ النِّفَاقِ, this person is dying on a branch of hypocrisy. So the implementation of this hadith, specifically for us in this room today, is to understand that it truly is a shame that we don't have the opportunity to do one of the greatest ibadat that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has prescribed for us. And when we don't have this opportunity, at the very least, so that we don't fall under this hadith of dying a death of hypocrisy or in a branch of hypocrisy, we have to at least make the sincere intention that if one day we had the opportunity to go out for a ghazwa, we'll go out for that, inshallah. And now hadith number 9, very quickly. It says, عن أبي هريرة عبد الرحمن بن صخر رضي الله عنه قال سمعت رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم يقول ما نهيتكم عنه فاجتنبوه وما أمرتكم به فأتوا منه ما استطعتم فإنما أهلك الذين من قبلكم كثرة مسائلهم واختلافهم على أنبيائهم. رواه البخاري ومسلم. On the authority of Abu Hurairah رضي الله عنه, that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, what I have forbidden for you, avoid. What I have ordered you to do as much of it as you can. For verily, it was only the excessive questioning and their disagreeing with their prophets that destroyed the nations who were before you. So the reason why I left this one for a very short amount of time is because we've kind of covered this in previous hadith. But the important key point is to notice that the wording of the hadith. مَا نَهَيْتُكُمْ عَنْهُ فَاجْتَنِبُوهُ, that whatever the Prophet ﷺ has forbidden from you, then avoid it. You must avoid it. And then it says, وَمَا أَمَرْتُكُمْ بِهِ فَأْتُوا مِنْهُ مَا اسْتَطَعْتُمْ. And look how merciful his deen is. That whatever Rasulullah ﷺ has commanded of us, it doesn't say then you must do it, or that you can't, the punishment for someone who doesn't do it is the following. It says, فَأْتُوا مِنْهُ مَا اسْتَطَعْتُمْ, that whatever you can do from it, then you must do it. And over here, there's two very small important points. Number one, when we say مَا اسْتَطَعْتُمْ, we're not saying that whatever you feel like you can do, or whatever you feel like is comfortable for you to do from the deen. Like for example, one day it's comfortable for me to pray 5 times a day, the next day maybe it's not so comfortable. Does that mean hadith is saying that فَأْتُوا مِنْهُ مَا اسْتَطَعْتُمْ, I can just, do 3 today and then combine the last 2 later? Of course not, right? When we say مَا اسْتَطَعْتُمْ, it's saying that which is possible for you to do, without, again, an actual shari'i excuse. But then number 2, notice the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, imagine if He prescribed for us the 50 salawat that were originally supposed to be happening. Imagine Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on top of that also said that if you don't fulfill a fard, then this is, even though you don't have the capability to fulfill it, then this will still be held against you. And subhanAllah, the key point here is that even if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would not be oppressive. He would not be oppressive. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, again, there's so much for us to be thankful for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for, that even if a person spent his entire life, every single second in the ibad of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if you weigh it with just the ni'mah of being able to see, or one of the many ni'am that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us, He would outweigh all the ibadah that we did. So notice that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, out of His mercy, is telling us that if you have an excuse, or if you can't fulfill a certain obligation, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has allowed that. And then, فَإِنَّمَا أَهْلَكَ الَّذِي مِنْ قَبْلِكُمْ كَثْرَةُ مَسَائِلِهِمْ وَاخْتِلَافِهِمْ عَلَى أَنْبِيَائِهِمْ. And this is something that is, for the time when Rasulullah was alive, that one of the things that destroyed the people from before them, specifically Bani Israel and others, is their excessive questioning of their prophets and their differences with them, or their disagreeing with them. And this is because, again, like many stories we can mention, that you overly, excessively ask questions to the Prophet because you don't actually want to follow in the first place. That if the Prophet brings something, you have to submit completely to what he brings, because he's speaking on behalf of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it's as if someone is going back and forth and arguing with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this is something that used to destroy the people from beforehand. For us now though, for us to take benefit from this part of the hadith, it's that, yes, Rasulullah is not here with us right now, but when we read a hadith, especially a hadith that, for example, we might see as something that, like, man, this might be too hard for me to do, or might be too, quote unquote, too extreme. And the most obvious example is the one we just read beforehand right now, right? This idea of jihad, and especially the last hadith I mentioned at the end about making the intention to go out for a ghazwa. These are things that might be uncomfortable, right? But we know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He prescribes what's ultimately good for us, and makes haram, or prohibits that which is ultimately bad. And it's actually in this exact context that the ayah came down about that you might love something, but it's actually bad for you, or actually evil for you, and you might hate something, but it's actually good for you. So in this context, that ayah came down. And with that, inshallah, we'll pause for questions or comments.
So just combining both ahadith and just taking away an action point and something to do. You talked about istita'a, and we mentioned that in a previous hadith about capability and whatnot. And in regards to the first hadith, of course, I mean, it's not capable, or how Islam defines as what is capable for us and what is not. And it's not in our capability to perform what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala prescribed for us, in our current situation. So how exactly do you want us to, carry the ideas of the second or the first hadith in regards to istita'a and capability?
There's two small things. Yeah, the first one is, you're 100% right. This idea of jihad being prescribed again, like we talked about before, this is something that is the function of a state. And again, we don't have a Muslim state for us to go under the banner and continue the jihad, right? So from an istita'a perspective, the same way like the hadith says, فَأْتُوا مِنْهُ مَا اسْتَطَعْتُمْ, that do this obligation if you're able to do it. In this context, we're not able to do it, so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala inshallah will forgive us, right? But now number two, part of istita'a is that like you work towards having the ability to do that. So for example, if someone, let's say if we take a small example, like on a smaller scale, like if someone couldn't pray, for example, because he sprained his ankle. Now this person has to, like he can pray on a chair now, and he has to pray on a chair, of course. Prayer is not going to be removed from him. But just because he's praying on a chair now doesn't mean he gets to pray on a chair for the rest of his life, right? He has to, go through the health precautions, etc., to get back to the point where he can walk, if he can, obviously. And then at that point, he has to pray, get off the chair and pray normally, right? So it's the same way in Sharia for everything. For everything to do with istita'a, is that the obligation has not gone away. So this is the key point that I'm trying to focus on. That just because we can't do it, or because something is, the sin is lifted off our neck for not being able to do it, doesn't mean it's not fard anymore. It's still fard. But the point is we don't have the capability to do it, so we have to work towards getting the capability to do that, if that makes sense. So that's a general answer, but yeah. So, any other comments, questions? جزاك الله خيرا. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد ان لا اله الا انت